On the evening of May 27, 2011, Michelle Hoang T. Lê, a 26-year-old Vietnamese-American nursing student, was scheduled for a clinical internship shift at the maternity ward of Kaiser Permanente Hospital in Hayward, California. The shift that night had been proceeding as usual until near the end of her rotation, around 7 p.m., when her supervising instructor, Lori Rosa, received an unexpected notification from security. Michelle had never signed out to confirm the end of her shift, even though this was a mandatory procedure before leaving the department. A sense of unease immediately washed over Rosa. She hurried down the hallways, checking the break rooms and asking nurses and staff throughout the ward, hoping Michelle was simply busy or running a few minutes late. But the more she searched, the more unsettling things became. No one had seen Michelle since that afternoon. One nurse recalled that around 6:45 p.m., Michelle had mentioned she was going to her car to retrieve some personal belongings. Her tone had been completely normal, showing no signs of urgency or worry, yet after that, she had simply vanished, never returning to the work area. With her instincts telling her something was terribly wrong, Rosa repeatedly called and texted Michelle. The silence on the other end stretched on, growing more frightening by the minute. Concern quickly spread among the staff, as everyone knew Michelle was a serious, responsible person who followed rules meticulously. She would almost never leave her post without notifying someone, and certainly would never abandon a shift midway through. While everyone remained engulfed in confusion and anxiety, around 7:30 p.m., the emergency room received a strange phone call. The person on the other end identified herself as Michelle, a nursing student, and requested to speak directly with her supervising instructor. The nurse taking the call immediately found this puzzling. According to department records, no nursing students were working in the ER at that time, so she replied that there was no Michelle there. However, the caller insisted, repeating her name and explaining that she needed to relay an urgent message to her instructor. She would not be able to return to the hospital that evening because her father had suddenly suffered a heart attack. According to the caller, she was driving around the San Jose area, trying to find the hospital where her father had been taken for emergency treatment. The voice sounded hurried but not overly panicked, as if it had been rehearsed beforehand. Immediately after conveying this information, the call ended. Several hours later, still no one had been able to reach Michelle. By around 9 p.m., genuine fear had taken hold. Rosa and a security guard decided to personally search the hospital's multi-level parking garage. They crossed the pedestrian bridge connecting the treatment building to the garage and checked car by car, calling out Michelle's name in vain. When they reached the third floor, where students typically parked, they suddenly noticed headlights flash in the distance. Then, unexpectedly, a white Honda CR-V shot out from a corner of the garage, screeched to a halt upon seeing them, then abruptly reversed and sped away. The vehicle was moving so fast it nearly collided with another car before disappearing down the ramp. Rosa was stunned. She had caught a glimpse and it looked remarkably like Michelle's car. Why would Michelle flee upon seeing her? The instructor frantically waved and called out, but the CR-V had already vanished into the night. The sense of dread had now reached its peak. Realizing this was no longer simply an unusual absence, Instructor Lori Rosa immediately reported the entire sequence of events to hospital administration, requesting urgent coordination to verify and search for Michelle. News quickly spread to Michelle's acquaintances, from colleagues and classmates to family members, leaving everyone in a state of panic, as if sitting on pins and needles. They continuously called Michelle's phone number, clinging to the faint hope that she would answer and explain everything. But the only response was an endless ringing over and over again with no answer. That silence only amplified the fear, because for those who knew Michelle well, her sudden disappearance without a word was simply impossible. When all attempts to reach her failed, the family and hospital were forced to make a difficult but necessary decision: report Michelle Liu's disappearance to the Hayward Police Department. From that moment on, the case was officially classified as a suspicious disappearance, marking the beginning of an intense investigation, shrouded in a heavy, ominous atmosphere that weighed on everyone who loved and worried about the young woman. Early the following morning, May 28, 2011, the Hayward Police Department officially launched their investigation into Michelle Liu's disappearance. Within a short time, the first crucial lead emerged. Detectives discovered Michelle's white Honda CR-V abandoned on a quiet street less than half a mile from Kaiser Hayward Hospital. The car was still carefully locked, and the interior showed almost no signs of being rummaged through or disturbed. However, one small but terrifying detail immediately put investigators on high alert. On the floor mat and door edges were dark reddish stains that had dried and looked very much like blood. The question arose immediately: could this be evidence of an attack? Without hesitation, police quickly cordoned off the area and collected the fluid samples to send for forensic analysis. During a more thorough examination, they also discovered unfamiliar long black hairs on the driver's seat that did not match Michelle's characteristics. License plate verification confirmed this was indeed the victim's vehicle. Looking around, police noted no signs of a violent struggle, no broken windows, no bullet marks, and no major external damage to the vehicle. Yet this very cleanliness only raised more suspicion. The fact that the car had been abandoned on a dark, deserted street, combined with the unusual traces inside, indicated this was clearly not a case of someone simply choosing to leave or an ordinary disappearance. Notably, at the third floor of the hospital parking garage, the last place Michelle had been seen, investigators also found red bloodstains on the concrete floor. Rapid testing confirmed it was human blood, located on the ground near where Michelle usually parked. Professional instinct immediately told police of a horrifying possibility. The young woman likely could not have survived if she had lost that much blood. From this point forward, police developed their initial theory. Michelle had most likely been suddenly attacked while walking to her car and then abducted. All the evidence collected indicated that the perpetrator had acted with extreme sophistication and deliberation. The killer not only remained calm enough to drive the victim's own car away from the scene to mislead investigators, but also knew how to erase or obscure important traces. More notably, they had even staged a fake phone call, impersonating Michelle to report that she was busy with a family emergency, thereby buying time and reducing suspicion from those around her. These actions required a certain knowledge of the victim's daily habits, as well as the ability to plan each step in advance. For this reason, investigators quickly ruled out the possibility that this was a random attack by a stranger. On the contrary, Michelle had most likely been harmed by someone she knew, someone who had planned ahead and waited for the right moment to strike. Investigation revealed that Michelle Hoang Thi Le was born in 1984. She was a gentle Vietnamese American woman, full of determination and always carrying within her a positive outlook on life. At 26 years old, Michelle was enrolled in an accelerated nursing program at Samuel Merritt University in Oakland, moving closer each day toward her dream of becoming a registered nurse. That dream was no coincidence. When Michelle was still a young girl, her mother, also a nurse, had passed away from cancer. That loss left deep pain, but it also became a powerful source of motivation, driving Michelle to follow in her mother's footsteps and continue serving the community with dedication and compassion. The Le family had settled in California many years earlier, and Michelle grew up surrounded by the love of her father and family members. From a young age, she had been raised with discipline and early on displayed a gentle, caring nature toward others. In the eyes of family and friends, Michelle was like a delicate rose that harbored resilient and powerful inner strength. Her brother, Michael, choked up as he shared that his sister always put others' needs before her own, ready to help even when it meant bringing difficulties upon herself. With her bright smile, sincerity, and warm heart, Michelle always brought positive energy to those around her. For this reason, when news spread that Michelle might have been harmed, not only her family but also friends, colleagues, and acquaintances were plunged into shock and grief. Everyone held their breath following every small development in the investigation, nurturing the fragile hope that Michelle would soon return safely. As soon as it was determined that Michelle's disappearance was no longer simply an ordinary vanishing, but showed clear signs of criminal activity, the Hayward Police Department immediately mobilized maximum personnel and resources to conduct the investigation. Every clue, no matter how small, was collected, reviewed, and analyzed carefully and meticulously, according to forensic procedures. After only a short time, the rapid test results delivered a truth that sent chills down the spines of everyone involved in the investigation. The DNA in the bloodstains found inside Michelle's Honda CR-V, as well as at the crime scene, matched completely with Michelle's own DNA sample. This discovery virtually extinguished all hope of a safe disappearance, simultaneously confirming the high probability that Michelle had been seriously attacked. Concluding that the crime was likely not committed by a stranger, police quickly narrowed their investigation to the circle of people close to the victim. They interviewed family members, friends, and those who had been in close contact with Michelle one by one, trying to find any conflicts or unusual signs in her personal life. However, the answers they received were almost all the same. Michelle was someone who lived harmoniously, gently, and very rarely had conflicts with anyone. However, when the name Giselle Diwag Esteban came up, the reactions of Michelle's brother and a close friend immediately changed. Both recalled a strange enmity between the two women in the past. Giselle had been a high school classmate of Michelle's in San Diego, but a few years earlier, their friendship had fractured after a conflict related to romantic matters. Michelle's family revealed that Giselle had once sent Michelle threatening text messages filled with hatred and insults, calling Michelle a slut and demanding she get out of our lives. This information immediately caught the investigators' attention. Within a short time, police had identified Giselle Diwag Esteban, 27 years old, currently living in Union City, not far from Hayward. With her prior relationship to the victim and a clear motive for hatred, Giselle was quickly placed on the watch list and became the primary suspect in Michelle Liu's mysterious disappearance. Parallel to identifying the suspect, investigators also quickly extracted and reviewed all data from the hospital's security camera system from the night of the incident. It was these footage recordings that opened a crucial turning point in the investigation. Images from the camera at the third-floor garage, the last place Michelle had been seen, revealed a series of suspicious details. Around 7:04 p.m., a black 2006 Honda CR-V appeared in frame and drove straight into the third-floor garage. Notably, this vehicle completely matched the one that Giselle Esteban typically used. The car parked there and did not leave immediately, as if the driver was waiting for something. Around 7:14 p.m., the camera continued to capture the silhouette of a small framed woman, height consistent with Esteban's, appearing and walking toward the stairway leading to the third floor of the garage. This person was not in a hurry, moving quite calmly, which made investigators even more suspicious that this was not a coincidental appearance. A few minutes later, around 7:30 p.m., another camera recorded the moment when a woman wearing nursing scrubs, whose appearance closely resembled Michelle's, walked briskly across the pedestrian bridge connecting the hospital building to the garage. This was considered the last time Michelle appeared on security cameras. The next timestamp made the picture even clearer. Around 9 p.m., the camera at the garage exit recorded Michelle's white Honda CR-V suddenly speeding out. However, according to instructor Lori Rose's account and other witnesses, at that time, Michelle should still have been at the hospital. This indicated that the car was no longer being driven by Michelle herself. When piecing together all the data, investigators realized a key detail. That night, 2 Honda CR-Vs had appeared at the garage. One black, believed to belong to the suspect, had entered the garage early and remained parked for an extended period. The other was the victim's white vehicle, which left the garage late but was driven by someone else. All these images not only corroborated witness testimony, but also perfectly matched the investigative theory. Giselle Esteban had been lying in wait in the garage for hours, patiently waiting for the moment Michelle would finish her shift and come outside. Not stopping at visual data, police expanded the investigation by analyzing location data from both Michelle Liu's and Giselle Esteban's cell phones, and it was these cold numbers that delivered a discovery that made all investigators shudder. Results showed that on the night of May 27th, the 2 phones belonging to Michelle and Esteban traveled along an almost perfectly identical route. The signals began leaving the Hayward Hospital area, then headed toward Niles Canyon and Sunol, a remote area on the edge of Alameda County. This was not a familiar route for Michelle. On the contrary, it was a desolate, hilly region lying between the cities of Pleasanton and Fremont, completely far from where she lived, studied, or worked. At night, this area had virtually no traffic, sparse lighting, and was an ideal location for concealing criminal acts. Data from cell towers showed that both phone numbers stopped in this area for approximately 20 to 30 minutes before their signals simultaneously disappeared. That silent interval immediately gave investigators chills. For the search team, this discovery carried particularly grave significance. It indicated a very high likelihood that this was the location where the killer had stopped and disposed of the victim's body before deliberately cutting off all traces of communication. Furthermore, investigators went a step further by recovering the complete content of text messages and communication history from the victim's phone. It was from here that the extent of the killer's calculation gradually became more clearly exposed. On the afternoon of May 28th, one day after Michelle's disappearance, a text message was sent from her phone number to Scott Marasigan, Michelle's close friend, and also Giselle Esteban's ex-boyfriend. The message was brief but highly unusual. "I'm about to head up to Reno. Everyone here thinks I'm missing. It's really annoying." As soon as Scott read this message, he immediately sensed something was off. First, the tone was completely unlike how Michelle normally texted. She was always careful and measured, never sending such flippant or irritated messages. Second, the reason given was utterly illogical. There was no reason for Michelle to suddenly drive to Reno, especially abandoning an important internship shift at the hospital without telling anyone. Scott's suspicions were later confirmed by police. Through investigation, they concluded this message was not sent by Michelle, but rather was composed by Giselle Esteban using the victim's phone, with the purpose of misleading friends and acquaintances into believing Michelle had voluntarily gone off on a trip and was not in any danger. It didn't stop there. The strange phone call earlier that had impersonated Michelle, reporting that her father had suffered a heart attack and that she had to drive around looking for a hospital, was also determined to be a similar staged production by Esteban through another phone call. These actions demonstrated that the perpetrator had calculated the steps to conceal her crime with cunning precision. As all signs gradually pointed in one direction, Giselle Esteban quickly became the focal point of the investigation. Without acting hastily, police chose to quietly monitor her every move, waiting for the appropriate moment to approach. Just one day after Michelle's disappearance, on the night of May 28, 2011, Detective Ritchie led a task force to knock on the door of Esteban's apartment in Union City. Contrary to the worry or panic many might expect, Esteban appeared suspiciously calm. She readily opened the door, allowed police to enter her home to talk, as if she had mentally prepared for this visit. When informed that the purpose of their visit concerned Michelle's disappearance, Esteban showed no surprise. On the contrary, she even displayed irritation and annoyance, blurting out a complaint that Michelle's name had once again appeared in her life. This reaction immediately caught the investigators' attention, as it did not resemble the attitude of an innocent person hearing news about a former friend's disappearance. During the initial minutes of questioning, Esteban adamantly denied any involvement. She claimed she had not seen Michelle and knew nothing about her disappearance. However, the more questions she faced, the more her statements became confused and contradictory. She offered roundabout, bewildering explanations about where she had been that evening, continuously changing details and unable to piece together a coherent story. Most notably, while trying to defend herself, Esteban inadvertently admitted that she had been near the crime scene at the exact time Michelle disappeared. Simultaneously with the contact at Esteban's apartment, another detective team was dispatched to interview Scott Marasigan, who had previously been in a romantic relationship with Esteban and was the father of her first child. There, Scott provided police with a series of threatening text messages that Esteban had sent him in the past. These messages contained hateful language, in which Esteban had multiple times implied she would deal with Michelle, viewing her as the cause of all the failures in her life. This was no longer impulsive jealousy, but rather showed a prolonged resentment and deliberate hatred. When connecting all the data points, from camera footage, cell phone location data, the fake calls and text messages, to the contradictions in Esteban's statements and the series of threatening messages provided by Scott, Detective Ritchie reached an important conclusion. Everything had formed a chain of evidence strong enough to confirm that Esteban was not just a suspect, but also had a clear motive and signs of prior preparation. With that assessment, police decided to detain Giselle Esteban for investigative purposes. Early morning on May 29, 2011, after receiving an emergency search warrant from the court, Hayward police immediately conducted a search of Giselle Esteban's apartment. And it was right there that the investigation entered an entirely new phase, as what was discovered left the entire participating force stunned. During the search, investigators seized a pair of white-soled athletic shoes belonging to Esteban. Notably, the heel still retained a dried blood stain. This sample was immediately sent for rapid testing, and the results came back almost instantly, sending chills through everyone. The blood matched Michelle Liu's DNA sample. It didn't stop there. When continuing to analyze Michelle's white Honda CR-V, police found several long black hairs on the car's floor mat that did not belong to the victim. DNA testing showed these hairs matched completely with Giselle Esteban. This directly refuted any possibility that Esteban had only coincidentally appeared near the crime scene. Subsequent evidence made the picture of the crime even clearer. The steering wheel and turn signal lever of the car both retained Esteban's DNA traces, indicating she had not merely touched the vehicle, but had directly operated it for a substantial period of time. By this point, the scattered puzzle pieces had completely come together. Blood-stained shoes, hair in the car, DNA on the steering wheel, all combined to form a dense network of physical evidence that was virtually impossible to deny, leading directly to Giselle Esteban. Additionally, police seized Esteban's personal computer and discovered that since early 2011, it contained up to 300 internet searches for Michelle's name. Moreover, the browsing history still retained chilling queries such as how to make someone have a heart attack without leaving traces, how to follow someone without being detected, and where to buy potassium chloride. Note that potassium chloride is a substance that can cause cardiac arrest. Esteban had even researched materials about toxic gases, poisons, and how to pick locks. By now, this evidence had painted the portrait of a killer with premeditated intent, preparing every possible method to murder the victim without being caught. However, despite the overwhelming evidence, police still needed to find Michelle to complete the charges. They launched a search operation for Michelle on an unprecedented scale. The Liu family, especially brother Michael Liu, partnered with a missing persons search organization to mobilize volunteers to search throughout the Bay Area. Over the course of 4 months, 8 sweeps were conducted through the hills and forests around the East Bay. Hundreds of people, from family members and classmates to complete strangers, persistently combed through every bush and stream bed with the faint hope of finding Michelle. Carrie McConnell, a mother from San Jose whose 14-year-old daughter had been murdered in 2009, also joined the search team along with her specially trained dog named Amber. Finally, on the morning of September 17, 2011, a miraculous but heartbreaking discovery was made. It was Carrie and her dog Amber who found skeletal remains hidden in the grass at Sunol Canyon near Pleasanton. Dental examination results a few days later confirmed that it was indeed Michelle's body. The remains had severely decomposed after being exposed to the elements for nearly 4 months. Investigators could not determine the exact cause of death as almost only bones remained. Nevertheless, finding Michelle gave her family their final answer and allowed them to bring her home for proper burial. Esteban was arrested for investigation into the crime against Michelle. Notably, at that time she was 5 months pregnant, but that did not prevent her from being charged with the most serious crime, first-degree murder. According to records, Giselle Duwag Esteban was born in 1984 and grew up in San Jose in an Asian American family. In high school, Giselle was described as an introverted person, not particularly outstanding but showing no serious abnormal signs. After graduation, Giselle enrolled at San Francisco State University in 2003 and moved to the San Francisco Bay Area to live. It was also during this time that she reconnected with her old high school friend Michelle. The two rekindled their friendship, and Giselle introduced Michelle to a male friend named Scott Marasigan. Ironically, this very act of matchmaking would become the seed of the tragedy to come. Scott only dated Michelle briefly for about a month before they broke up. However, Giselle developed feelings for Scott and began dating him not long after. Giselle Esteban entered adulthood with many emotional upheavals. She and Scott had a daughter together, born in May 2005. However, The two frequently argued, breaking up and getting back together multiple times. Part of the reason stemmed from Giselle's obsessive jealousy regarding the friendship between Scott and Michelle. Although Scott maintained that he only saw Michelle as a friend and they were no longer in contact, Giselle could not accept this. She blamed Michelle for all her relationship problems, harboring the belief that Michelle has destroyed my family's happiness, even screaming that both you and that woman deserve to die. After her daughter was born, Giselle became increasingly unstable. Scott recounted that Giselle repeatedly threatened suicide during arguments or threatened to kill him and Michelle if he didn't comply with her demands. On one occasion, she used her keys to scratch her own face, then called police and falsely accused Scott of assault, causing him to be wrongfully arrested. Giselle's toxic manipulation terrified everyone around her, making them fear for Scott's safety. In 2010, the conflict reached its climax when Scott won custody of their child after proving that Giselle was mentally unstable. Devastated, Giselle returned to San Jose for a while, then came back to Northern California at the end of that year with intentions to reconcile. She even proactively suggested a three-way meeting, including Michelle, to start their friendship anew. During that meeting, Michelle cheerfully shared that she was about to start nursing school, while Giselle appeared happy for her friend and apologetic for the past misunderstandings. But as it turned out, it was all just a facade staged by Giselle, because deep inside, her hatred for Michelle had never subsided. On the contrary, it had become even more obsessive. After that meeting, Giselle secretly monitored Michelle's every move. She saved Michelle's phone number and address, quietly devising a brutal plan. Court records later revealed that Giselle suffered from several mental health issues. Scott testified that she had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder with psychotic features and had been hospitalized briefly several times for suicidal threats. Nevertheless, Giselle was fully aware of her actions during the time the crime occurred, as she was still caring for her child, driving normally, and attending parenting skills classes. Moreover, behaviors such as planning the murder and concealing evidence showed that Giselle remained lucid and meticulously calculated each step. She was also pregnant with her second child by another man in early 2011. It's clear that Giselle Esteban's life was always a spiral of instability: failed relationships, single motherhood, psychological burdens, and growing hatred. Instead of finding ways to regain balance, she let hatred consume her, viewing Michelle as a thorn that had to be removed at all costs. On May 25, 2011, Esteban texted a mutual friend asking for Michelle's home address, using the fake excuse of wanting to send a letter demanding Michelle stay away from our family. That same day, she called Samuel Merritt Nursing School, pretending to be Jamie, claiming to be a close friend at the airport who urgently needed Michelle's phone number. The school staff refused to provide it, but Esteban did not give up. On the morning of May 26th, a Thursday, Giselle personally went to Samuel Merritt School. She posed as a former student wanting to meet with an advisor, requested to wait in the department office, and when staff weren't paying attention, Giselle stole an ID badge belonging to someone named Eleni from a desk to gain access to the faculty area and other internal sections of the school throughout May 26th, seeking more information about Michelle. What she didn't realize was that stealing this badge would later serve as a fateful piece of evidence exposing her own crime, as Esteban dropped Eleni's ID card on the passenger seat of Michelle's car during the attack, leaving behind evidence that betrayed her own movements. With information and tools prepared, on the afternoon of May 27th, Giselle Esteban entered the final phase of her plan. She drove her black 2006 Honda CR-V from Union City to Kaiser Hayward Hospital, where Michelle was working. Afterward, Esteban left her own car and walked toward the stairway leading to the third floor to find a hiding spot. Around 7 p.m., Michelle appeared. Just as she was opening her car door, suddenly from behind, Giselle Esteban lunged at her. The attack was swift and brutal. Based on blood and hair traces, investigators deduced that Giselle used some kind of sharp object to strike Michelle's head right beside the car. Michelle collapsed onto the cold concrete floor, and within just a few short minutes, her life was taken. After the deed was done, Giselle dragged Michelle's motionless body and stuffed it into the back seat of the victim's white CR-V. However, the killer did not head straight to the disposal site. She parked somewhere hidden near the hospital and called the hospital to misdirect everyone into thinking Michelle had suddenly left her shift because her father had suffered a heart attack. After the call, Giselle drove Michelle toward the desolate mountain area she had already selected and disposed of her friend's body there. When finished, Esteban returned to the victim's car. She wiped down the interior one last time, but didn't realize that small traces like blood soaked into the floor mat and DNA on the steering wheel still remained. After that, Giselle drove the white CR-V back to the Hayward urban area, likely intending to abandon it near Michelle's home or near the hospital to stage a fake scene suggesting Michelle had left on her own. Around 9 p.m., when Giselle drove back to the hospital parking garage to retrieve her own car, she unexpectedly spotted instructor Lori Rosa and a security guard standing on the third floor searching for Michelle. In a panic, Giselle slammed on the brakes, reversed, and nearly hit another car, then floored the gas and fled the garage, exactly as Rosa had witnessed. Fearing she would be caught if she went to where her car was parked, Giselle decided to abandon Michelle's CR-V on a roadside not far from the hospital. Afterward, in the darkness, Giselle slipped back to find her black CR-V parked in the hospital garage. She got into her own car and left the scene, surely believing no one would know she had ever been there. But when she returned home late that night, Giselle Esteban was not completely at ease. She knew police would soon trace their way to Scott Marasigan because of the romantic connection between them, so she conceived a sinister plan to frame her ex-boyfriend. Taking advantage of the fact that she still had a key to Scott's house that she had stolen on May 20th when picking up their daughter, Giselle snuck into Scott's place and hid Michelle's iPhone under the floor mat of his car. But it wasn't until nearly 2 months later, when all of Giselle's crimes were already abundantly clear, that Scott cleaned his car and discovered Michelle's white iPhone lying under the floor mat in the back seat. Thus, this attempt to frame someone completely failed because Scott had cooperated with police from early on and had a clear alibi, so finding the phone much later only further reinforced Giselle's cunning criminality. What shocked the community was the cold-blooded cruelty of the killer. Giselle attacked her friend right there in a hospital parking garage while she herself was pregnant. She did not hesitate for a moment, showed not a shred of remorse after committing the crime, and even tried to shift blame onto one person after another. All that remained was the profound grief for the victim's family and a costly lesson about the dangers of hatred. Michelle's case went to trial quickly in May 2012 at the Alameda County Superior Court, with Giselle Esteban charged with first-degree murder for acting with premeditation and intent. The prosecutor proved that Esteban had killed Michelle out of jealousy, hatred, and rage, stemming from her mistaken belief that Michelle had a romantic relationship with her boyfriend, Scott. He presented a compelling array of evidence, including surveillance video, cell phone location data, DNA tests, threatening messages Giselle had sent to Scott, and 300 searches related to murder methods on the defendant's computer. This evidence demonstrated that the crime was calculated and thoroughly prepared, not at all a spontaneous act. Although the defense attorneys made every effort to reduce Giselle Esteban's charges, requesting that first-degree murder be reduced to manslaughter or second-degree murder, these arguments were quickly rejected. The defense claimed Esteban had acted in a sudden fit of anger and emphasized that her pregnancy had seriously affected her mental state. However, facing the mountain of evidence showing the crime had been planned in advance, carefully prepared, and systematically concealed, those arguments were deemed weak and unconvincing. Most notable of all was the defendant's own demeanor in court. Throughout the trial, Giselle Esteban maintained a cold, emotionless expression, never once showing grief or regret over the victim's death. She refused to testify on her own behalf and never expressed any remorse whatsoever. When her attorney advised her to apologize in hopes of receiving leniency, Esteban casually uttered a chilling response: "Forget it." Finally, on May 29th, 2012, after deliberation, the jury delivered their final verdict. Giselle Esteban was guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum of 25 years to life, the maximum sentence that California law imposes for this crime. When pronouncing the sentence, the presiding judge specifically emphasized the defendant's lack of remorse and callous attitude, warning that if Esteban did not change, the door to parole would likely never open for her. For Michelle's family, The verdict could not compensate for the enormous loss they had to endure, but at least, amid their profound grief, they could feel some measure of relief knowing that justice had been served to the fullest extent possible. And that concludes today's case. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.